26-mile marathon. So some of us from Washington will be coming back to New York, changing our clothes, and going up to Hartford.
And you're going to run in the whole thing.
Some of us, the beauty of this marathon is that there are choices involved. You could run the entire marathon, you could run half the marathon, or you can walk half the marathon.
Oh, that's
Even
nice.
though we're going to be participating as a team, we're each going to be doing our own thing. So some of us are going to be running the entire distance, and some of us are going to be running half the distance, and some of us are going to be walking half the distance.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else? Oh, yes, we have our former managing editor of the Catholic Worker, Pat Jordan, with us. Now managing editor of the Commonweal. Sit down and take a bow, Pat. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. I think you probably better get there early if you want to go. It's going to be a cast of opinions.
And you'll be happy to know, Patrick, we're hoping to run, we didn't have the room for it in this issue, but we're hoping to run an interview which Bernie Connaughton suggests is an exclusive that he and Joe Roberts did with him up in his place up in Bronxville or up in was back in '88, and it's a very timely piece for today. So look for a future article. We were hoping someone would write us a very succinct but beautiful obit. No one sent one in that I know. But we really want that to be part of, we know that, those of us who heard him, that he was such a remarkable human being and lived for so many years. 90 what was he when he died? Yeah, he was quite remarkable. Next week's meeting will just so happen to coincide with the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi. So next week we have the privilege of having Michael True, who just was in India this summer, and Anna Brown is going to bring a little film, a little part about the Salt March of Gandhi, and it'll be back in this room. And the only other thing I want to add is, this is the only place you get some goodies when you leave. There are bagels out there that just arrived tonight. Please help yourself. There are bags out there. Bring them home. Bring them to your wife, your kids, your cats, whoever. So, all right, so tonight we have with us Terry Rogers, Ann Montgomery, and Anna Brown, who've been in the Middle East on many occasions, and I'm going to let them, of course, introduce themselves and their last times that they were there, which was in this last year. So without further ado, would you, first we'll start with Ann Montgomery.
I'm first because it was the others have been there more recently, and I think when I was asked to do this, my heart sort of sank because my voyage to Gaza was a moment of hope, and the massacre came afterwards. But it struck me later, as I thought it over, that really the situation is an ongoing one, and therefore what was happening before last winter is very important still. Free Gaza was a boat trip. It was organized by internationals, many from the UK, California, elsewhere, who had already been in Palestine, many of them on several occasions as part of the international solidarity movement or others, and had been either kicked out of Israel when they tried to get back in, or had been arrested and sent back. And so they said, well, we've tried every other way, let's go by water. Can't get through the land barriers, we'll go by water. And the principle behind it was people who are oppressed and on the bottom They need help. They need food. They need medical care, especially in Gaza. They need construction materials because so much has been destroyed. But underneath all that is a need for human dignity and freedom, to make your own living, to get your own supplies, to be able to build your own houses and hospitals. So the idea is we're not going to bring supplies, although the group has done that because people are so in need. But we are going to say these borders should be open. Gaza is a prison. People don't see what's going on there, as is true of so many other parts of the world, and especially in the West Bank, too, and places that Kathy has been, where there are Iraqi refugees in Baghdad and so forth. So that was the principle. It was not a religious group. As a matter of fact, my best friend in the group was a declared atheist, but we got along just fine. They wanted me along to sort of be the religious representative, which is sort of a joke, because I feel that, you know, what Jesus said about how you get into heaven is, you know, but I didn't see you, Lord. I didn't see you, but you helped your neighbor. You helped your neighbor. And these people were, all of them, true humanists in the best sense of the word. They cared about human beings and were willing to sacrifice their money, maxed out credit cards, went into debt, give their bodies, and keep on working, and they're still doing it. Well, anyway, this was the first trip. I arrived, of course, as usual, after all the organizing had been done, and there were 2 boats. And the boat I was on was an ex-fishing boat. Here we're going to sail from Cyprus to Gaza, sort of renovated a little bit to hold us. And it was called the Liberty, which is interesting because it was very deliberate. The other was called the Free Gaza. Liberty was the name of an American Navy boat that was early on during the early wars between in the Middle East. The Israelis actually bombed it. I think it was, what was it, 67, 68, whatever it was. And it was silenced. They were silenced by our own government. At first there was going to be retaliation. You don't bomb your allies' naval vessels. They were calling it a spy vessel, who knows. But the sailors were silenced. They could never speak about it. And then all these years later, they finally broke their silence. So this boat was called the Liberty in memory of them. I think 30 were killed and others wounded. And they actually telephoned us for a radio interview before we left and thanked us for naming this. We had a memorial for them because they are as much victims of war as anybody else. And we threw roses into the water as we left Cyprus. So here we were on a fishing boat facing up to the Israeli Navy, who declared, you will never get there. No one's gotten into Gaza for 40 years, and they're not going to do it now by water. And that was true. And it was the first time the Cypriots, who helped us a lot, said that they were giving papers. As you leave the port, you have to get customs, go through customs and all this. They were giving the papers for somebody to sail from Cyprus to Gaza, and that's what they put on their papers. So we did, and we fully expected and had trained, through all this discussion and so forth. We trained, what do you do when these guys in black masks come up out of the water and board your ship at, gunpoint, and, you all sit down, you hold hands. How do you be most nonviolent but most solid together? All the things you usually go through in preparing for a nonviolent action. And up to the last 2 hours before we reached the port of Gaza, they had said that. They will not get through, and they called us pirates. They called us all sorts of names. So we called ourselves the pirates of the Mediterranean. Going to go in wearing pirate hats. But 2 hours out, after having been seasick all night, that was our worst thing that happened to us on the way out, because this little boat was rolling back and forth and back and forth. You couldn't stand up without hanging on to one of the posts or having somebody hand you from hand to hand just to get to the bathroom. So, it was all very... the Greek sailors who helped us were just wonderful, and they were part of the group. Everyone was part of the group, and the captain and the sailors and all the other people. There were reporters on board, too. So we got within 2 hours of Gaza, and suddenly a cell phone call came through because the communications were very poor, and the report was the Israelis had backed off. And I think the reason they backed off then, when they haven't since, they've stopped many boats since and boarded boats and rammed boats, is that there was, not here, but in Europe and in the Middle East, there was tremendous press coverage before we left. Nobody knew where the boats were until they actually reached Cyprus, because we were so afraid the Israelis would damage them or put a bomb on them, as they had done previously to a Palestinian group trying to reach Gaza. But they were outfitted someplace in Greece and then came to Cyprus, and that's where we boarded. But they had backed off, and I think it was because of that, been a tremendous amount of international pressure. There are a couple of parliamentarians on our boats from Europe, and since then there have been many more high-level people, because that brings more world attention. We also had the sister-in-law of the Prime Minister of England, who was, good activist. She was threatened at home by phone calls. Her children were threatened. People play dirty in these times, and that sort of thing happened too. There was hate mail and all sorts of stuff. So at that moment, we could hardly believe it. And so that last through 2 hours were just sort of euphoric. And as we approached the port of Gaza, which is, the only sea entrance to Palestine for the Palestinians, the West Bank or Gaza, and there's a seawall. It was a regular harbor, and the seawall's like this coming out of the harbor, and the entrance is here. And I saw it looked like rocks sticking up all along the seawall. And as I got closer, you realize these were people. The people of Gaza. We were supposed to be there two weeks before that, but all sorts of things got in the way. So they'd come out. Half the population of Gaza, according to count, was on those seawalls. They'd gone home and come back again. And that's what it meant to them. And as we entered the harbor, boys and young men came swimming out, one boy with a Palestinian flag in his hand. They boarded our boats. We nearly sank. Finally, the Palestinian police came out, a Coast Guard came out in their boats and picked these boys up and threw them back into the water. They can swim like Dutch, But, and then had to surround us to escort us away from the harbor, because that was such a moment for people. You can imagine. Nobody has gotten in for 40 years, and now it's happened. So, that was the moment that's in my mind, in contrast to what happened later. But already the situation was there. There are various ways of oppressing people, of making them feel in prison, of making them feel less than human. The fact that we visited all over, because they got us a bus. The people who were hosting us, the peace groups there, are really nonviolent, really strong. They took us down to the border of Egypt. We walked along there. It looked like no person's land. We went up to the checkpoints in the north and stood there with, this little boy and his family until the soldiers on the other end, who could see us way down the road, they knew we were there. And they'd refused these people to get their little grandson to, I don't know whether he was going out to parents or other relatives, out. He had his papers, but finally they let him through. But it was the same situation in the hospitals. Children who had a strange disease that could be helped if they only got to a regular hospital, had papers from Egypt. They were willing to take them into one of their hospitals. They were willing to take them in, and the Israelis would not let them through the border. And that was typical. And so they got those papers renewed. Every time they were refused, they would try to get them again. So that was the sort of stuff that was happening then, is still happening, of course. And so those are the constants. And And the other two will speak more about what they experienced after this terrible bombardment. When we got there, we were there, all of us had agreed we'll stay 3 days. And, a group of about 6 or 8 stayed longer because they had connections. They were people who could do real help in the hospitals or, with the different relief groups. But you had to be able to give some kind of service to make it worthwhile, to be there when the resources were so small. But those 3 days were full. The hospitality was typical Palestinian hospitality. Here is my home. We made one little detour on the way to the Egyptian border to a school where children had prepared little plays. And one of them, which struck me very much because they had beautiful dancing and the rest of it, but these boys about 11 or 12 years old put on a little play from a village scene because it was all about their lives. And this was a play about how you reconcile between villages or tribes, and it was all nonviolent. And it was all done by gestures, 2 little groups talking to each other, sending somebody to the other side. And I thought, this is their tradition. They know how to do this, and we think we can impose something on them or stop them from being able to go back to a tradition that they knew how to solve problems and conflicts. So that was just one other element. I am now the proud holder of a Palestinian passport. I have Palestinian citizenship because the Prime Minister, whom nobody respects because he's Hamas, also gave us these just as we were about to leave. They'd taken extra pictures, and he said, these are legal under the Oslo Accords because they're diplomatic passports, and that's what it is. So it's a VI passport, so you're going to sort of treasure that, although probably never be respected any place except maybe Lebanon. You don't know. But I think the other thing I wanted to mention is that, my discouragement made me think, what does it really mean to be a nonviolent activist? You have to have hope, and you have to be able to help other people have hope just by being there, but also you don't look for results. I mean, we might have felt like failures because there was a massacre afterwards, but you knew that stuff was going on before. The fact that people knew we cared about them was something. They did know, and they accepted it, and we were able to get people out of Gaza on the returning boats who needed to get out and had the right kind of papers. But I think also it was an example of the kind of nonviolence that really has to keep going, in Gandhi and Martin Luther King. You work in community, and that can be very painful. We had meetings 2 weeks beforehand in Cyprus. It was prolonged because the boats had problems getting to us. But you have to make very difficult decisions about nonviolence, about what you do when they stop you, et cetera, and be able to work together. So that was one element. It was the element of nonviolence itself. What do you do when these Israeli sailors confront you? How do you show your nonviolence and yet stand firm if they ask to inspect the boats? And the Hebrew speaker, of course, we had with us, along with them, if possible. What happens if you are, as they said they would, arrest us, deport us? What happens because we have Palestinians with us? They may have had British citizenship or American citizenship, but still you knew the Israelis were going to treat them differently. So for as many people as possible, it's going to be jail solidarity. We will not leave. We will resist leaving jail until these people are freed too. And that has happened with later groups. So I think that says to me the very vulnerability of being on this old beaten-up fishing boat was one element. You come vulnerable, you're ready to face whatever you have to face, which could have been dangerous, and in the end wasn't. But you see what's happening to other people. Some went out on the fishing boats, which were attacked, with hoses, and one of them was rammed because that was happening to the men who were trying to go out with their fishing boats beyond a few miles, and the coast was all fished out and polluted and everything else. So getting little fish, whereas they should have been able to go out 20 miles into international waters. So it was that, I think, that stayed with me. You don't get discouraged afterwards. Witness Against Torture doesn't get discouraged because Obama has not closed Guantanamo or Bagram. You keep going because it is in the doing of what you want to happen that it does happen. And so maybe who's
Can I
next?
just say a word?
Yeah.
Because I was in Jordan when the two ships came in. And 42% of Palestinians live in Jordan. And so it might not have gotten press here, but it got press there. I'm sorry to bring this.
No,
I cut out all the newspaper.
Yeah, she sent me
and
everything.
and I got to see y'all on television. I mean, it was just round the clock, 24 hours. This extreme excitement and joy that you can't describe, and the expressions on the faces, and as the boats came in, and as they greeted you, and as you came on land, and it was just, just listening to you brings back all those memories.
Yeah.
And this went on for days.
I think we don't understand what it means to be a Palestinians or an Iraqi or Afghanistan who's not involved in any of, violence, but their lives go on and on like this day after day after day. And we think if we can't get something done right away, we're failures, and they keep going, keep with their spirit.
Well, one's always in a tough position following Anne Montgomery, but I'll do my best. Yeah. I noticed in the calendar that, in the Worker, that you'll be showing Baleen Habibi on October 19th, and it's sure. Oh, okay, yeah. And I would highly recommend seeing that film. It was made by a former member of the IDF, and so when he goes now to film, he's actually talking with his former comrades, and the conversation that they engage in is really quite something. But I remember I saw it 2 summers ago when I was working with ICAD, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolition, and we saw it one night with Shai, the film maker, and then that night a group of us said, we've got to go to Baleen. We've got to go and walk with people in Baleen, and we did. So please come see it. We're also showing it at St. Peter's if you can't make it here on October 15th, and then I guess it's here October 30th. Terry, did you say? Yeah. Okay. So this summer I had wanted originally to go back and join ICAD for a second time in rebuilding homes. But ICAD lost all of its European funding last fall, and they weren't able to run the summer camp as they had in years past. So I decided to join a Code Pink delegation that was going to Gaza. And originally, I was on a delegation that was supposed to go through Egypt, but I have a very bad habit of not keeping up with details sometimes, and I hadn't checked my passport, and when I got to the airport, I wasn't allowed to get on the plane because even though my passport hadn't yet expired, it wasn't valid long enough for me to come back from Egypt. And so that night at Kennedy, I found out I wasn't going on the delegation. So I came back and got up the next day and said, no, you are going to go. Luckily, Code Pink had another delegation going through Israel. And so I got my passport very quickly and went on that delegation. But I knew it was unlikely that we would get into Gaza trying to get in through Israel. So I think, as Anne just said, you quickly realize it's not about you, it's about the work, and just to do the work that's been offered to you at this moment. And it really turned out to be yet another eye-opening, heartbreaking, heart-opening experience in Israel and Palestine. So what I'm going to do is I brought some articles that I wrote for the rather prestigious blog site, www.wagingnonviolence.org. One of its founders, Eric Stoner, is right here. And this is also to put in a plug for that site, which is really incredible and offers stories of nonviolent work throughout the world. And it's an uplifting read every day to read it. And so I'll kind of talk and just read some excerpts that I had written when I was there. I was there in early June. And the first night that we met as a community of delegates, it was announced, the very first announcement was that a 35-year-old Palestinian father of 2 children with another child on the way was killed at a nonviolent demonstration in Nailin, a town that borders Berlin. He had been shot in the chest while on this nonviolent walk. And we had been asked, as a means of introduction, to choose a word that best described how we were feeling at the start of our delegation's efforts. And the word that I chose was grieving. It was the only thing that came to me after I heard of this young man's death. On the plane ride to Israel, I had been reading Judith Butler's most recent book, Frames of War. In this book, she asked, why is it that some lives are grievable and other lives aren't grievable? Why some lives are to be saved while others are shed, if even noticed, and particularly during times of war? In one of the book's many memorable phrases, she claims that our efforts to build borders between one another would be better spent appreciating how bound up we are in one another. Not borders, but how bound up we are in each other. And so the phrase became a touchstone for me as I made my way through the early days of the delegation. It didn't allow me to slip into the facile duality of friend and enemy, but challenged me to live truthfully as one who indeed, as we all are, deeply bound to other human beings, deeply bound to one another. And so the community introduced itself, and it was really incredible. Some of the people on the delegation and some folks who later spoke were members of the Shimetzin, and they are high school seniors. In fact, they're in New York, 2 of them, this coming week. In their senior year of high school, they wrote a letter refusing service into the IDF. And this is jumping ahead in the delegation, but we had an opportunity to meet with them one evening, and they blew us away. First of all, they're so young. And when we asked them something like, well, how did you come to this awareness? Because everybody joins the military. It's almost unheard of not to. And they would say things like, well, back when I was 12. And I was thinking, back when you were 12? That's amazing. They had been thinking about this. But just a couple things about these group of young people that we met. First of all, they were full of life. And they weren't a bunch of sad sacks up there bemoaning their fate, because really, either they had spent time in prison, and even if they got out of prison, they're shunned by their society. Their life chances in the future are extremely limited in terms of job and higher education. They really paid up, as Dan Berrigan often phrases it. And yet, they're full of life, and they're so clear, and they're so insightful about the state of their own society. At the same time, they're incredibly compassionate toward their fellow Israelis and are not into condemning or blaming. They just see the fear that lives in people, but they also see through a lot of manipulation. So one woman said, my family is also Holocaust survivors. And what I take from that is you don't do that to other people. You do not allow this to happen again. Very clear, very forthright. And the other thing I loved about them, there was no competition in the group. They were very comfortable with each other. And by that I mean, not all of them chose to go to jail, if you put it that way. In other words, you can get out of going to jail. You're sent to a psychologist to find out what's wrong with you that you won't join the military. It's amazing. And And one woman chose that. And there was no, like, oh, we did, we're better than you, we went to jail, you only went to the shrink. They were very comfortable with each other, very supportive of one another. It was an unbelievable sight. And so they were part of our delegation as well. At the first meeting, one of the delegates reminded us that 2009 was the last year in the decade that the United Nations had declared a decade devoted to the development of a culture of nonviolence for the sake of the world's children. And I thought again of this father and his children and how we had failed each other in this work. And so we as a community committed ourselves once again as being responsible in part for the work of nonviolence. And when we got back to the hostel, we engaged in a conversation with a young guy from Tel Aviv. That's where we first were. And for this young man, any effort to help the Palestinian people was seen as a threat to the security of Israel. So immediately you're in this kind of dichotomous relationship where if you help one, you're harming the other. And I think we have to get out of that mindset, that framework. And I was wondering, why do we go there? Why does security for one mean death for another? And just something that I was kind of working with and dwelling with throughout the trip. So that was the first night. And then we went to the Negev desert, and we stayed on an organic farm in the Negev, and which is really quite incredible. And again, treated beautifully and with grace and hospitality by our Israeli hosts. And we were just a few miles from the Erez border crossing to Gaza, and we were also very close to Sederot, and I'll speak to that community in a moment. So for the next days, we made 3 different efforts to get into Gaza. We had playground equipment. We had items that were not allowed in, such as coffee, pencils, pumpkin, chocolate, paper. All of this has been banned to the people of Gaza. Now, most of our, I think, the sense was we were not going to get in. So much of the monies that we had collected and the playground material went with our Code Pink delegations that got in through Egypt. And in fact, they finally did get in, and they built these marvelous pink playgrounds. And they were telling us that the kids were so excited that they jumped on the slide, or they jumped on the swings even before they had been fully assembled. They also brought over soccer balls, soccer uniforms, and just the oohs and ahs, of delight of the children. So it so happened that on our delegation, Patch Adams was with us, the doctor, not Robin Williams, the real doctor. And what an incredible experience to meet with Patch Adams. He is really a genius, I would have to say, at what he does. And it really spoke to me of a different way of nonviolence. I think for those who know me would say that clowning is not my temperament, Maybe I'm denounced as a fool often, but it's not my thing. I don't really do clowning. And yet, being with Patch and being on this delegation, that's what I learned. That's what the work was. You never know what your work will be in nonviolence, and that was our work. And so we had been joined by a troupe of Israeli clown activists, and we went through a lot of training, even putting on the red nose, which we often wore a lot. Was a big step for me because it's not my thing. And I am going to, when I'm done with this excerpt, I'm going to pass around, I have this gorgeous picture of Patch at the border crossing with his red nose. He constantly had a chicken on his head, and he is holding a child. It's so very beautiful. So one of the scenes, so for 3 days we were going to go to the crossing and do the heart work of clowning as our way of maybe breaking down barriers, having them come down and hopefully get in. We made a serious effort to get in, but it was through the work of clowning. So one of the things that we saw is Patch had this enormous, like this big pair of red silk underwear. He called it underwear security. We all need it. And he actually got a retired Israeli military general to get in the underwear with him. And there they were, standing in this big red underwear together. It was incredible. And so we all handed in our passports at the checkpoint, and of course they're probably like, great guys, now we have all your information. They hand them back. And so Patch turned it into a moment of, he got the passports back, and he suggested a game of playing strip poker with the passports. And the guards were all clustered around him. And there's another great photo where it's just two hands together. And I know, because I was there, that it was Patch's hand in the hand of an Israeli soldier, but you wouldn't know that from the photo. You just see the hands clasped together. And so that was how the day went. It was, the Patch usually wears the red nose, the chicken on his head, enormous pants and big shoes. And he's always cracking jokes or dancing around or feigning a kind of ignorance of sorts, and really reached people. I mean, I saw it at that moment, how he was able to reach so many people. And when you get to the border crossing, it's the most desolate, inhuman space I've seen in a while. It is horrifying. It's all big walls and barbed wire fence and trucks and so many guns and vast space. It's really meant to keep people apart. And what the clowning was able to do, we did dancing, we did kazoo playing, we had balloons, we did kite flying, was to transform this space, just for this moment, into a place of joy, into a place of gathering. And it was our work. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be with folks in Gaza, but my work was here. And so my own heart was melted and opened to the work at hand. I had written an article, actually, that Eric and Brian so gracefully accepted, and then Common Dreams took it. But the reason I mention that is because I got a lot of snarky comments, like, only a white girl would write something like that. And I mean, I knew what they were saying. It seemed so ridiculous in some ways. In other words, was I making light of a situation of great tragedy? And here's my response to that. One of the things that we did was we went to, first of all, let me say that whenever hands are clasped, I mean, I think that's, no matter who it is, it's the connection that was seen. And I know that we weren't probably going to get in, and I know that there's tremendous suffering. I'm well aware of that. But here's something that was said to me when we went to Bethlehem, and we met with the folks from the Alternative Information Center, which is excellent. They do such great research work. And Nasser Ibrahim, who is the director of the Palestinian-Israeli Alternative Information, said that political resistance is an effort to hold on to your humanity. It's the work of being human. And so for me, the clowning became that work of, as Anne was saying, how are we nonviolent in an impossible, intractable, seemingly, nothing ever is, but it seems like that situation, how do we do that work? And so that's what we did. We were also joined by a group of musicians that really had people dancing and moving and swaying. And so the whole movement was not one of aggression coming from our end. It was a movement of great flexibility, of dance, of opening, of wanting people to join with us. I mean, that's what you really wanted, everyone to join the dance of human life. So on the third day, what happened was, when it was clear that we were not going to get in, we spoke with our Gazan counterpoints, and on that third day, there was a gathering of over 350 people in Gaza at the same time that we were on the other side. And we couldn't see them, but we could see each other's kites flying in the air. And we also walked up to the fence, and we all wrote notes to folks, and we put them in the fence for people to read. And there were some folks from Gaza that were able to get through. They had medical appointments. And so we met and spoke with them and asked them to convey our presence and our support for their work. And then we went to another checkpoint. This is where a lot of the supplies get in. And we basically did the same thing. We walked across the road and we brought all of our supplies that we wanted to get in. And I want to mention this because what happens is you often see these big trucks going in with all this stuff. And so it looks like a lot of stuff is getting into Gaza. But what we were told is that all the stuff goes into this warehouse, and a lot of money is made, in this case, by Israeli investors in the warehouses, but it just sits there. It doesn't get into Gaza. But that's not what you see from the Israeli side. But the reality is a lot of the stuff is just wasted. It just sits there. It doesn't get into the people who really need it. And so that was the experience during the day. And one evening, half the community went to Sederat, and then half of us stayed behind to listen to Patch talk about this work of clowning. For Patch, it's life-saving. One thing I didn't know about his life is that at an early age, he had attempted to commit suicide, actually. And because he felt for many reasons, but one thing, he is really brilliant, and he felt he didn't fit in, there's no place for him, no room for him. And part of his working out of this darkness is through the light of this joy, which he really attempts to bring to others. And I was really amazed by what he does. And he showed us a film that they had made of clowns, Italian clowns that had gone to Afghanistan. And he was working with people in hospital. And there was a scene of a little girl. She had to be maybe 4 or 5, and she was horribly burned over her body. And there were very few, there's no anesthetic, I don't think, and very few supplies. And a doctor was literally picking the charred skin off of her body. And she was I don't know how to explain, like a quiet wailing. And then her mother, who was holding her, she didn't say anything, but all you saw were these tears streaming down her face as she's holding her child. And yet the clowns came in, and they did this work with people. It's what they could do at that moment. It might have been all they could do at that moment, but it's what they had to do. And so I learned something. You work with what you have. You work with what's available. The group that went to Sederat, that was very interesting. They went and tried to meet people and talk with folks. What they came back with, though, was rather sad. The conversation went as follows. Basically, there was a call for annihilation of the Palestinian people. Just wipe them out entirely. And so it was hard to kind of know where to go with that, other than to just listen to what was being said. In the afternoons, then, we went to a number of workshops. The Shimitzin was one. We met folks from Free Gaza. And I want to mention something that Anne had also said. The woman who spoke with us, she said, we do not want to be people who are holding our hands out all the time. That is so humiliating for us. We want to live our lives. We don't want to keep asking for help. You need to get to open Gaza. You need to allow us to work. And that is the work that you have to do in your country. We have to be seen for who we are as fully human. We want to work. We want to live. We don't want to keep asking for handouts all the time. And we met with the sanctions movement, the boycott and divestment movement. We met with Physicians for Human Rights. We met with the Shimitzin, and all was really quite something. We can maybe talk about that in question and answer because I don't want to go on too long. Another person that we met with was a young woman professor by the name of Elise Agazarian. And she was really quite something, professor of sociology at Bethlehem University. And she was Armenian and Palestinian, if you can, so her family was filled with the history of fleeing death. And I wanted to speak. She spoke to us about just her experience in Bethlehem and growing up as a Palestinian. And she said, I used to go to university every day and look right through the window at so many trees. Looking at the trees and the horizon, I would often feel empowered. I could feel these trees often consoling me on the way. The feeling in time started changing. I always looked at the horizon and thought there must be a nice future, nice horizons. There are so many dreams I cannot touch. There is so much for the future. In time, we were obliged to go down from the bus and be searched. So every day we were searched as being potential terrorists. Every day we have to stop on our cues. Our stuff had to be searched. We had to be searched. Every day we had to hear, "You barbaric Arabs." Then there was a sense of solidarity. We were somehow helping each other. Gradually, there was a one-colored gray wall over there. Every day I would see how the wall was growing up, up, up. We were trying to challenge that, to say no, to go on demonstrations. We did our best, but then one day we were protesting. There is no freedom of opinion, and many people were arrested. We have 11,000 political prisoners. It's not easy to live under occupation. I think occupation is the degradation of a person's humanity. It is being deprived of your past. It is being deprived of being able to move. It is constantly being represented by others. You look at the sky and there are Israeli planes. You look at the land, you see it changing. Landscape transformation. You don't know if tomorrow you will see your friends, if your ID card will be revoked. It's not easy to live under occupation. It's having to live with many minimal resources and still thanking God and saying maybe tomorrow will be worse than today, so let me just live today because I don't know what's going on. It's not knowing when the Israeli helicopters will come or when the Israeli tanks will come and for whom. It's not knowing if you are dangerous or not. Sometimes you say something simple and you're viewed as a terrorist. One time I was working on research in Jerusalem, and suddenly the Israeli soldiers broke in the office saying we have dangerous documents, and we were just doing simple statistics. It's not easy to live under occupation. It's not easy being a woman living under occupation. As a woman, you already have your personal challenges, and then you have to deal with society and its social pressures. You have to deal with the different dominations of your body by different parties, by different groups. It's seeing your home threatened by demolition. It's challenging both the social and political pressure. And I'll just say a little bit more about what she said. As a teacher, I look at my students. Last semester, I had a class where there was one girl who was pregnant, and she was coming to university every day, challenging her mother, her father-in-law, her husband, leaving her kids at home, crossing a checkpoint, coming from Hebron to Jerusalem just to study. And she wanted to study because it was her dream. There was one guy who was arrested by the Israeli occupation. He was not simply dealing with the difficulties of being arrested, but also memories of being arrested. Why was he arrested? Because he was distributing brochures of a certain leftist Marxist persuasion. And she said to her students, they tell me, why will we study sociology? Why will we study development? There's nothing, there's no future. Come on, let's admit it. And I say, but how can we live? How can we make our daily lives better under occupation? How can we look at what is remaining of the existing horizons? How can we look at them and we don't know what happens tomorrow? But we can try to resist. We can try to be strong despite everything. And one example of that is that she was telling us about, she had been invited to a conference in Italy, and she promised her children that she would bring chocolate back for them, or her students. And so she came to the airport early, coming home, and she got there early, and she made it through the checkpoint. But then she had to go through another checkpoint, and there she was escorted by Israeli agents down to the basement of this airport. And then she was stripped of all of her clothing except her bra and underwear. And then they took her clothing, and she had to sit there just in her bra and underwear and search it, search it, search it, search it. And finally they put it back on. And then the Israeli agents walked with her to the shop, and they said to the clerk, "We will pick out what chocolate she wants." And she said, "No, I will pick out the chocolate for my students." And she did. And then they walked with her on the plane, and they sat next to her on the plane. And then on the way home, the airline attendant served everyone dinner but her and the woman next to her. And finally she lost it, and she said, "I am a human being. I am not a terrorist. I'm a human being." And then the Israeli agents made fun of her and said she was crazy. So this is just one woman's experience. We've been keeping in touch. Here's another thing. She wants to be married. She's been engaged for 5 years. But her husband, who fled to Jordan and is now in the Netherlands, if they get married, it would have to be there, and it's likely she'd never get back in to be with her family. So after 5 years, she's finally made the decision to get married. And I haven't heard from her in these past couple of months, and it may be that she just cannot get back in to see her family. So these are the decisions foisted upon folks. Okay. Just one more story. I did go to Berlin. I did go on the march again, and maybe we can talk about that. But I wanted to tell the story of Bassem Abu Rama. When we got to Berlin this time, there was a big banner because Obama had just been in Cairo, and the banner said, "Obama, take a look." Now, the folks in Berlin have been doing a nonviolent, Sam was saying, I don't know how they do it, but they've been doing this walk for 4 years now. Every single Friday they go out from the mosque and they do this walk, and they're heavily bombarded by any number of things. But Bassem Abu Rama was a young man, and he was 31 years old, and he had been a real joy and light to the community. He was the kind of guy that he would walk right up to the fence, he'd be flying a kite. He worked with young people when they were very angry or didn't know how to deal with the situation, trying to help them deal with their anger, work with your anger. And on the day of April 17th, he had been at the fence, and there was a French journalist who got hit by a piece of shrapnel, and he went over to help her. And the Israeli was still launching these gas canisters, and he put up his arms to say, "Stop, we're nonviolent, we're foreigners and children," and he got blasted in the chest by a high-velocity projectile, tear gas projectile, and it blew open his chest, and they were unable to get him to hospital in Ramallah quickly enough, and he died later that day. And just a description of him, he was known as a man of nonviolence. He was known as someone who was very charismatic. He was a handsome man, by all accounts, and he was actually learning Hebrew because he had an Israeli girlfriend, and he wanted to speak the language of his love and quote-unquote, of the enemy. And I thought it was really something to lose someone of such character. I have a lot more to say, but I want Terry to speak also. Before I went, I met with Jeff Halper. He was in Brooklyn, and he had just come back from the Free Gaza boat, and he said something very beautiful. He said, when I got there, first of all, everyone wanted to speak to me in Hebrew because they hadn't spoken the language in so long. And he said, I met with one old guy, and he said to me, "How can we get out of this mess together?" And Halper was really taken by that. Again, it wasn't us, them. It was, how together can we get out of this mess? How can we do it? So that's our question for tonight. So thank you.